Before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel. That way, when I release more videos like this, you'll get notified.
So welcome to the show, Jared. So glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Betsy. It's been a while, but it's good to see you again. I'm glad you reached out and happy to be here on the show with you.
So here's what I'm super excited to learn more about your story. So I've seen so many changes in your business throughout the years as you start talking about this futuristic kind of stuff. So I wanted to have you on because I love to unpack a little bit more of your story because I can feel the clarity and I can feel the energy behind your work. I could see it in your videos. I could see it in everything that you're doing. And if I'm experiencing that just from afar, I'm sure others are and your clients are. So I'd love to hear more about your story. But before we get talk about what you're doing now, could we back up a little bit and talk about when did you start a business? So what was your career like? How long have you been in business for yourself?
Oh, okay, great question. So the first 10 years. So number one is I've never worked for anybody in my entire professional career. That's, as my wife would say, it's because I'm oppositional defiant and just don't have the the patience to tolerate most of the corporate bullshit that is it okay to do I need to censor myself here? I'll try to keep it to a minimum.
But we'll just call it corporate BS. Does that work?
Corporate BS, yes. Yeah. Myself, my entire professional career, the first 10 years, 11 years was as an independent insurance broker. I enjoyed working for myself and solving problems. And then about 8 years into that, I started to get really bored. I was making more than I'd ever made. We didn't have kids at the time. I was getting to race and train on, I used to race bikes but I was just bored out of my mind. And so I started looking at ways to get out of that and try and get into something else. And that's when I discovered this obscure field, but that immediately resonated with me, and that was around the area of strategic foresight, or becoming a futurist. So I put things on hold and went to grad school and got my graduate degree in strategic foresight and future studies. Not saying that's the path that people have to take. I was just absolutely fascinated with this, and transitioned my business about, is it 2021 now? 11 and a half years ago. Yeah. So I transitioned from being an independent insurance broker into the consulting, advising, training, that whole world where basically you're being paid for your ideas and your advice and your skill set. Yeah. So that was the background on that.
So did you see yourself as an independent business owner when you were an insurance agent, or did you see yourself kind of as a subcontractor working for a firm or franchise person? How did you see yourself back then?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess that would depend on how you define being a business owner. I mean, at the most base level, nobody was paying me to get out of bed in the morning. I mean, if I didn't work, I didn't eat. And so there was no W-2, no benefits, nothing. I was selling benefits, but I did not have benefits. So I contracted with multiple companies. And so that was, but I guess in a number of ways, I had this similar conversation with a good friend of mine who is a serial entrepreneur for real. I know everybody on LinkedIn is a serial entrepreneur. Yeah. But this guy is. He has started and sold 8 companies now, for 7-8 figures. I mean, that's what he does. He's really good at that. And he and I had a conversation about what does it mean to be an entrepreneur. And I kind of pieced this together for myself. I think the first half of my career really felt more like being a hired gun, like I'm a mercenary, I'm out here like, look, hunt, kill, and eat. That's what I do. And I make sure that, that my clients are taken care of and business is good, but that I see myself as running a business per se. I had people that worked with me, but I don't know that I ever stopped to think of myself saying, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I was like, I'm really just a mercenary is what it felt like. But again, I think it's relative to how you define being an entrepreneur. I think the one thing is that I just never wanted to work for anybody.
So at least you had that in common throughout your whole career, is that you were an independent thinker and you always wanted to work for yourself. With the format of how that in the container, that changed, but that drive didn't. How did you know? What was it that got your interest into strategic foresight? Like, how did you get interested in that?
Yeah, well, I found out about it through a friend of mine who was doing marketing and copywriting for the program. And he started talking to me about it. And I thought, this doesn't sound real. This sounds ridiculous. But I started to get a little more interested in it.
Sound ridiculous because it seems like so you, or sounds ridiculous like who would ever need something like this?
That is a good question. That is a good question. I think, I think maybe it was more the messenger. He's a good friend of mine, but I also know him so well. I was just like, if you're involved in this, this is probably something that's, I don't know, But no, so I went to the World Futurist Society in 2009, and it's being held in Chicago, their world conference. And I went to go meet with the director of the program and sat through his session. And when I listened to him talk about it, I immediately knew this is what I wanted to do. And it was just because it's the way that my brain works. So my undergraduate degree was in history and English creative writing. And so for me, I'm a contextual learner. So this is why I suck at math. Is because those are just numbers. There's no story to them. So I need context. So history, English creative writing, these are all things that require context, multiple, layers of information to see a bigger picture emerge. Well, future studies and strategic foresight is essentially the same thing. You're really looking at things as they are now, and then you are asking questions that most people don't ask, like, how might this here impact multiple facets of society that gives us this three-dimensional picture of what the world might look like. It's not about predicting the future. It's really about saying, this is what it might look like. And so immediately my creative brain was like, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. There's huge value in that. That's a skill set. It's giving people an opportunity to think beyond 90 days, and not just think beyond it, but actually envision what it could look like, and then utilize that information to make better decisions right now. So it's like, this is what I want to do.
Okay. First off, this is fascinating. And I can't believe on all this time that we've known each other, we never discussed that we were both history majors as our undergrad. And I think, and I'm a creative writer as well. And I think it's the same kind of thing, because I look at history, it was all around the story. I never really cared about, I was never good at military history, like this war happened, like this battle. It was more the context, big picture. But what sounds really interesting about the way you're talking about it is you're looking at you're looking at today in the context of the past and the future, like everything in this more holistic kind of standpoint. Has this always been the kind of person you've been? Like when you were a kid, what did you play with? And does this kind of mindset in the writing, was that how you were? Like, what were you like when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah. So I grew up as an Army brat. So we moved around every 6 months to 3 years. So I think that lends to, and I'm also, attention deficit, left-handed musician who can't read music, but I compose music. All these, I'm a walking contradiction in so many different parts of my life. So I think a lot of that lends to just having a large imagination. So, what might this be like? So I always wanted to create things. Even in music, when I started playing the guitar, I would start learning somebody else's song and then find one or two notes that I really liked, and then I'd start creating my own. It's like, okay, so I never brought any of that stuff to completion. I never learned anybody else's stuff all the way through. I was always finding different pieces of things to create my own with. And so anytime you're in a process of creation, whether you realize it or not, it's a forward-looking action, right? So if I'm going to create something, I am envisioning something that isn't here yet. I'm going to bring it to life. All that is in forward motion. So I think for me, the writing, the interesting, the deep interest in future studies and history is just that I wanted to create or compose more stories, more music, things that I really connect with it on a deep human level, which is what I think most people connect with. Nobody gets excited about facts or figures. They get excited about the story that you put around those facts or figures.
So this is so fascinating because I'm hearing what you're talking about, and I'm seeing the value proposition on the website that you have. Could you just real quick, what's the address of your website? Because I want to make a comment about the website in case somebody wants to check you out.
Yeah, for sure. It's newfuturist.com, but it's spelled NUFUTURIST. So instead of new, it's NU. That's basically that. Yeah.
So when you're talking about this, it makes me connect in with what I read that stood out to me when we were looking at your website, is this whole idea around you get to write your own future. you know, that writing your own future, which seems to be connecting with the kid that you've always been, is write your own future. I bet you were the kind of guy that you could look into a blank piece of paper and you see stuff in the blank piece of paper where other people just see a blank piece of paper. I don't know if I'm right about that, but
yeah. You know, I mean, that was always kind of the struggle, because that was never really incentivized or encouraged. You know, I mean, I'm 43 years old. So when I was a kid, you know, the way I'm hardwired was usually seen as more of, well, you know, I mean, my parents would get excited if I got C's. I would too. And if I got a B, it was like, oh man, we're throwing a party. This is great. But I see where my kids are today, and there's so much more that actually encourages that type of creative thinking. But that wasn't really the case for me. So I did see that. I even think today, still a number of ways, I'm having to work through accepting that and leaning more into that. Even as much as I've put that into my career, it's still almost ingrained in you, like, well, okay, I got to make this a little more boring so it's more palatable. And that's just crazy. So, yeah.
this is great. I would love to go back in time though, when you first started. So all right. So it sounds like you were an insurance broker. You got bored. You still always needed to do your own thing. You go to grad school, you get your degree in strategic foresight, then you start a business. Or something that was more of a consulting kind of business. So let's talk about those early days when you were building your business. What was working, and then what were some of the things that were just not exactly what you wanted it to be?
Yeah. So, you know, a mutual friend of ours, I mean, when I really got started, I met Chad in the beginning, from the very beginning. And that was one of the biggest benefits to my business, to be honest with you. I would have floundered for years, I think, had I not met him. And, you know, I'd say probably the biggest impact that had, not only on, hey, here's how you should be thinking about the way you price yourself, all those, the mechanics, the basic things to make sure you can make a living and put food on the table, but also really emphasizing creating just a huge library of content. When I was in the insurance business, all the different insurance companies gave me all their materials, everything else. My job was to go out, find the best fit for my clients, and sell them that policy, and then service that. That was it. There was not a, great, now I need to create a brochure, and now I need to do this, and now I need to do that. None of that stuff. Didn't have to do any of that. So stepping into this realm where you have to wear all 5, 6, 10 hats to build that business up, that gave me a huge head start. So that's where I was when I first got started. That was incredibly helpful. Some of the other areas.
Can I jump in real quick? Just for those who are listening, we're talking about Chad Barr at chadbarr.com or the chadbargroup.com. And I would probably agree with you. What Chad did really well for you is what he did for me, is he pushed me to write content. Yeah. And I'm seeing these parallel paths between us. Is what difference did creating content, what did it do for you in terms of your clarity, your confidence? What difference did it make in that early stages where you wanted to get paid for your advice?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that you start off not being a commodity. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much.
Immediately within the first 6 months to a year, I would meet other people as I was transitioning, because I had a lot of clients in the insurance business say, oh, this is great what you're doing. In the old adage, by the way, people say, oh, well, just go back to your existing clients. I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. It takes more energy to convince your old clients who have seen you as this to now see you as this other thing. Don't do that. That's stupid advice. You will waste time, hate yourself, and probably end up quitting what you're doing. So all that
totally agreed. That is so powerful. That is so powerful. Don't waste going to old clients and trying to shape them on your new identity and image. That's brilliant.
It was like the terrible advice in the insurance business, which I never gave this advice ever to any of the associates that worked with me. I say for me, I trained them, but they're still independent. It was like, okay, well, when you get your license, the first people you should go to is to your parents and to your family. I'm like, don't do that. Don't do that unless they need it, So anyway, all that said, so switching back, I think the big leg up is some of my other clients would, in the insurance business, say, oh, well, you should talk to so-and-so, they're a consultant, or you should talk to them. I was like, great. And I'd go and have lunch with them. And I figured out real quick, their consulting was, they're certified in this, they're certified in that, they can deliver this. And I thought, wow, okay, this is where the world is very different. What Chad taught me, and just being around other folks in his community as well, was, no, you create your own intellectual property, which makes you unique. Like nobody else is going to deliver what you can create. Do that. And so that was the foundation for me, was create your own body of work, because that's going to stand the test of time. It doesn't mean everything needs to be perfect, but it does mean that if people check you out, they're going to see that you are creating something unique. And again, by unique, I don't mean, oh, life-changing and world-changing and nobody's ever talked about it. That's another myth that's out there. It's more of, oh, you actually wrote this, you created this. That means you have some original ideas, as opposed to come to my website and I'm certified and all this stuff. And it also, when you have that foundation of things that you've created, as you well know, Betsy, you can charge higher fees right out of the gate, because they're not comparing you with somebody else.
That's a great point, but you can charge higher fees, or you will be more confident in charging your fees.
Yeah, good point.
So my experience with Chad is very similar to yours. And I remember Chad telling me, he's the one who got me all started on the content, just like you. And he's like, yeah, you're going to write some blogs. I'm like, okay, cool, I can write. But then he's like, okay, you're going to do some videos. I'm like, no, do videos. Right. He's like, no, you're going to do videos. So this is how it worked out with Chad. He's like, yeah, you're going to do some videos. So I'm like, fine, but I don't do scripts. Like, I'm more like off the cuff. And he's like, yeah, you're going to do scripts. So I would do scripts. So I wrote my scripts, and I was staying at his house at the time, and I was sitting up in the guest room. And so he's like, go write some scripts. So I wrote them, and then we recorded them. And he's like, these are terrible. Go back upstairs and fix them. I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's so funny. So then I did that, and then we recorded it. And then during that day, first time out, like I recorded 7 videos. And apparently at the time, because he was new in the whole video thing, that he only got, before, clients only did like 3 videos. I'm like, oh, cool. So now I got like this confidence. But what's really interesting is when I got my first lead after I hit play on my first substantial website that I did with Chad, it came through a referral. And these people really wanted to work with me, like really bad. And they but they didn't know, they didn't know about my website all that much. They just knew me from other scenarios. So they handed me my competitor's proposal, and they said, match this and we'll hire you. And it was for like this 2-day executive workshop. And I think they were asking for like 7,000 or something like that. And I looked at the proposal, and I just launched my business, and I'm looking at that proposal. I'm like, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to make a difference. And I did what I thought was a proposal, which was like 5 times more, or I don't even know exactly how much it was. And the clients are like, we're going to have to break the bank to work with Betsy. And something came over me in that moment where I'm like, no, I'm not an expense to be managed. I'm an investment that will deliver a return. And they're like, whoa. And they signed on the spot. So I want to go back to the point around so I tell my personal story to relate to what you're saying here is, I really wonder how much is content. I do know content establishes your authority, attracts clients. And I know that I've gained all the business I have pretty much through my content. I know it warms up your leads and that kind of thing. I'm very curious just from your own personal confidence, but because for me, creating that content, it allowed my value proposition to drop from my head to heart.
Yeah. Well, and let me also say this, just for anybody that's listening here too. When I was thinking about hiring Chad, I was looking at his stuff, the different clients that he had. So I knew about you long before you and I ever connected. I mean, years before. So a big decision. So that also shows that was a really powerful tool. Was like, oh, this is really good. This is good quality. And so, so I'd say all that to say that your site and how that was positioned also gave me confidence to hire him and get him to help me get my business off the ground too. So you were asking or making that statement about, your content moving from your head to your heart. I think, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. You were talking about imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
I think this is a problem that I've found. So I'll speak only about myself, but I see this in a lot of people too, is that early on starting my business, I really tried to, I followed Chad's advice, but then I tried to emulate, others in that community as well. And I found myself limiting what it is that I wanted to talk about because I was trying to run it through a filter that primarily focused on profits for your business, revenue, all these, like everything was about the bottom line. I was thinking to myself, but my work absolutely does impact that. But the appeal of it is more on the qualitative side. right? It's how are we changing the way that we think so that we can envision new avenues to move our business in, or how can we develop something new that serves a need that isn't quite here yet, but all the signs are pointing that it will be soon. That's more on the qualitative side. Can I put a price tag of like, here's the percentage of return you're going to get on that? Sure, through some funny math, it's like, but so I found myself trying to emulate certain things that made it more difficult to really just let go. I mean, so I've never, ever in my entire life given two shits about having a nice car. I wouldn't take care of it.
You never gave two whats?
Oh, poops. Sorry. About having a nice vehicle. I never have, right? I mean, I drive, I'm drive whatever, like, but the material, the possessions, which again, I'm totally fine with anybody who wants that. That is not, but that was a big thing that was emphasized. It's like real success. You must look successful and wear this and wear that. And that just got exhausting.
And the Mont Blanc pen that you're supposed to bring into the client
which
meetings,
is ridiculous. Yeah.
Which is ridiculous. I'm like, my ideas are going to be what wins a client over. If I need a pen.
Yeah. Like, look, this isn't 1980. What I said is, hey, to each their own. But again, I look at that and it was very helpful for me to go through that process of trying to recreate a certain way to look and be, and then try to filter my ideas and the value through that. But eventually it just got exhausting and I just kind of threw my hands up and said, I'm holding myself back on this. So it didn't quite hit the head to the heart until I finally just threw a lot of that stuff to the wind and just got really clear on, what is it I'm doing? I mean, I left the insurance business not because I wasn't making money. I was making a great living doing that. I it was just all about the money for me, I should have just stayed there, right?
Right.
But the head to the heart thing was when I spoke to somebody who was going to be on my podcast years ago that I was doing. And she just asked me point blank. She goes, what exactly is it you do? And, I think she's from New York originally. And I started to go into this thing about what I do. She goes, no, stop. She goes, you've got a great looking site, lots of content. She goes, but I can't tell if you're Tony Robbins or Peter Diamandis. Like none of this stuff is clear. She said, it looks like you're trying to kill an ant with buckshot. And I said,
that was good.
I was like, damn, yeah.
Oh, she's good. I want to meet her.
Yeah. I hired her on the spot, by the way. She was supposed to be a guest on my show. This was not going to be a business call, but she asked me that. She goes, I can help you with that. I said, great. Where do I send the check? And so that really got me kickstarted into simplifying my message, clarifying it, and really just focusing in on a strategy for creating content that helps me attract the people I want to work with. Because again, through that old filter, I was attracting people I don't want to work with.
Right.
Like our values are completely misaligned. I'm not interested. And again, it's not an insult to anybody who's that way. It's just, I was working hard to attract people I don't want to work with.
So it's interesting. A lot of people would say that, or the objection, if somebody's listening, they're like, yeah, but what about if I turn people away, what about the scarcity, why would I do that? Because I don't want to limit it because I'm not going to make as much money. In your experience, by limiting who you served, did it open up opportunities for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now I have, one of the things when I redid my site is it's very, very clear, or the intent was that I wanted people to come there and know right away whether I'm their guy or not. I didn't want there to be any like, oh, I think he'll be great. And then we get down the road and it's like, no, this is not going to work out.
So what is it that you do then? Tell us what you do.
Yeah. I mean, in the most simple terms of what I do is I teach leaders and teams how to think like futurists for the very purpose of literally creating the future for themselves and the people they serve. That's it. And that takes on many different forms. But it's just, look, I teach you how to think, not what to think.
I think that there's a huge differentiator in what you're talking about here. I worked with other futurists, especially when I was at Disney, where they talk about, forward product planning and that kind of thing. And what other people seem like they do, even in the futurist space, is like, all right, read the tea leaves and align your business towards that. And it sounds like what you're doing is, read the tea leaves, but create your own future. You don't have to, you're not constrained by what you see in the future. You could actually impact the future.
Yes.
I don't know if that's accurate, but that seems to be your differentiation versus other futurists. And if so, how did you get to, because that's the kid you always been. How did you get to that clarity to say, I can create and craft something that hasn't been done before versus just read the tea leaves and just align to that.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. That is, I really try to focus on this, is that for most futurists, they're going to tell you what to think. Hey, in the next 20 years, this is what's going to happen. But that's not helpful to anybody. It's like, if I take you to the future, leave you there, well, who does that serve? It's like, well, that's great for entertainment. But instead, what I want to do is teach you. You don't have to know everything I know, but I want to teach you simple skills that make you effective, that you can execute on. One of the things that's really a core component of my work and my message is that the future is impractical if you can't leverage it now. That almost stops the brain to make you go, what, the future as practical? That doesn't make sense, but it does. Because looking at the future, thinking about the future has no real practical value unless you can take that information and make better decisions with it right now. But you have to have a skill set to do that. Instead of just me coming in and telling you, Betsy, here, I've just run a trend report, which, by the way, is super easy. And I can't believe people still pay for this. You can run a trend report, a scanning report, whatever it might be. And this is what we think the future might look like. And you're supposed to take action on it. Well, my first question would be, how did you arrive at this conclusion? So you're right. Here's the tea leaves. And I always say, look at those, understand those, but then ask the other question. Well, what else is possible here? What questions are we not asking? This is what they're saying. Because as we know, and it's well documented, predictions about the future are notoriously wrong. They are so bad, but we still cling to them. Yeah. So that is a big differentiator. I have no interest in telling you what the future is going to be. I mean, we can sit around, I can tell you what I think, but what I'm really interested in is teaching you a new way to think, and then to take these tools and apply them so that you can make them your own, really.
Because it's not like just this one particular company and fixing their sales process, but it's more reimagining the possibilities for the future, because they've always done it this way forever. And I didn't know if that was something that you overcome with your clients, is they think I've always done this way. So they're stuck on the historical kind of, this is the way we've always done things. And are you somebody who comes in and breaks them out of, this is the way we've always done things, and just imagine the future? Like, you can imagine that? Or what would be a different problem that your expertise would be appropriate for?
So when you frame it like that, yes, that is a big thing, because a problem that many organizations and industries have is that they take what is working, they take past information, present understanding of that information, and then they have this preset idea like, well, the future is uncertain, so we don't know, so let's just take what we got here and throw it out into the future. So the way that an organization could really reimagine where their future position or where their value is going to be is to first, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is to create a three-dimensional picture of what the future could look like. We have to create context for the future. And rather than saying, well, let me find some trend reports and whatever the experts are saying on this is where the teaching people how to think, to connect dots that other people aren't making sense of. We'd really want to focus in and find something that in the industry is really fixated on. So, if there was a certain disruptive technology or an issue that continuously came up, they said, we just feel like this is going to, become something for us, either good or bad. They don't have to know exactly how it's going to impact the future, but you really find this real area of concern that they all have. And then what we do is we take that, we see where it is right now, and then we start asking very specific questions about how might, let's just say, artificial intelligence. That's an easy one. How might artificial intelligence impact not the travel industry, but we start to ask questions like, how might it impact traditional roles of the family? Now, I know this can sound crazy, but here what we're doing is we're trying to understand by looking at a trend, issue, or an event or technology, we're looking beyond its original intent, and we're looking beyond the audience it was originally intended for. This is how you find disruptive areas. This is how you find opportunities. So you start asking questions about multiple facets of society that are really almost seem off the wall. But now what you're starting to look at is like, now I'm thinking about how this technology or this thing can impact how we look at the family. Well, especially in the travel industry, well, if traditional roles in the family are being changed because of this type of technology, then how does this impact timeshares, right? So you start, again, you go into a lot more than just that, but it's now you start to take what timeshares are, what the value actually is today, and you ask where are the opportunities for us to move to serve this new way of thinking that's not here yet. And whether you start doing it now or not, you start talking about it that way, people start to look at you and go, wow, this company's envisioning something. They're talking about things a little bit differently. That's really what foresight is all about. That's really what creating the future is all about, is looking beyond the original intent and the audience that it was intended for. You think about Facebook, which is easy. Developed in 2002, 2003, launched out to just Ivy League college kids, then to regular college kids, and then out to, by 2004, it's out to everybody. Well, less than 6 years later, it's the number one tool used to overthrow a 30+ year dictatorship in the Middle East. But its original intent was to see, is Sally dating Bobby? And, it was a kid's tool, really, a college kid's tool. It's a hot or not replacement. That's all it was. And then it becomes a tool of revolution less than 6 years after it's out to the market. Now people say, oh, well, isn't that crazy? And it's like, not really, because if you look beyond that original intent and you look at its capabilities and its possibilities in multiple facets of society, that's where the pictures start to emerge. And you start to see, that's a possibility. And then you get really creative. You say, well, we like that possibility. So now let's invest our time, energy, and effort into making that future happen. And that's where you get, foreign policy and a whole bunch of other stuff that probably don't have time to go into.
Okay. So your passion is palatable. This is so exciting, but I'm sure as other people are looking at, like, I have passion, but I don't have as confidence. You mentioned the whole idea of the imposter syndrome. Did you ever struggle with imposter syndrome, or where does your confidence come from around your ideas and what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I think we all struggle with imposter syndrome at various points. Yeah. I think for me, there's the thing that I continue to work on and have gotten a lot better at is always understanding my motivations for what I do. When I got into the insurance business, it wasn't because, well, I love insurance. No, I got into the insurance business, number one, because I enjoyed working for myself. I was good at it. I like solving problems. And then number two is like, I felt like I needed to prove a bunch of people wrong that I could actually support a family and make money. I was a musician, history major, English career writing minor. What am I doing in business? Had never had any desire for business, but I had something to prove to people that had no idea I was trying to prove them wrong. Right. So I think if you always check your motivations and you're really clear, you're self-aware about those things, then you can really, well, you have more agency. You have more of a choice to make. Say, well, I recognize what's motivating me to do this. Is this serving me? And what is it I would do if I didn't have this, this motivation to prove other people wrong in my case? And then that starts to open up a whole other set of opportunity for you. I think the other thing that's really important too is to turn things off for a while. Stop listening to all this other stuff and just shut it all down. And then just take time and listen to yourself. Figure out, number one, what is it I really want to do? Number two, do I want to work for myself? Trust me, there are days where I think, I really wish somebody would just tell me what to do this week. And then I think about the week following that and I go, yeah, I would quit after. But that's how I'm hardwired. I tell most people, 9 out of 10 people should not work for themselves. They just shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there was a step change when you met that girl from New York. It sounded like before there was, I kind of hear like there's 3 phases of your career. Career phase 1 is I just want to work for myself and I just know it. And I have something to prove here. Phase 2 is I'm just starting to learn how to establish myself as an advice-based business in this kind of consulting space. And there was a lot of imitation of other people and you were just kind of there. And then it seems like you're in this 3rd phase, and it sounds like you're also getting ready for a 4th phase. But it seems like that you went from that 2nd phase to the third phase, which is after talking to the girl from New York, is what is it that's super important to me, and where's my power alley? What's special? What am I trying to do? And getting more clear on your unique approach to the futuristic kind of stuff. And now it seems like you're ready. I don't know if I'm framing this right, but now it sounds like you're ready for another one where you were an expert. It seems like you were a sought after expert in this futuristic space, but it seems like you're pushing yourself now to becoming a true thought leader. And there's a different kind of thing there. I don't know if I'm hearing it right, but if these are the phases, but what is, if you are moving from the sought after expert to thought leader, how do you see the difference between the two?
Well, I would, so define for me sought after expert and thought leader. So it sounds like there's a different way of looking at those things. And then I could better answer your question so I understand how you define those things.
So in the first part of when you first started working with Chad, you're using content to establish your credibility and to attract clients. Then
Right.
after the girl from New York, it sounded like you got more clear on your being the expert in this futuristic space, that you were just trying to say, this is what it is. And then to me, a sought after expert is I'm an expert and I'm known for what I know kind of thing. Thought leadership, to me, the difference between the sought after expert is something that you said the other day, is when we were talking about your website, you wanted to go from your name, Jared Nichols, to
Yes.
the new Futurist, because you felt like the idea, you mentioned something about the idea has something bigger than even you, and you wanted to not be in the way of activating this idea
Gotcha.
to the world. So that's where I feel
Gotcha,
like
yeah.
which is what you described a little bit. I'm just kind of reading between these tea leaves around what
Yeah.
motivated you to make the shift that you're making to your website right now. And it seems like there's something in this new and you Futurist that you're wanting to activate in the world.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yes. So to answer that question, I think you're summing it up pretty well. So a good friend of mine who's done work with me, the new Futurist icon, the logo on the site, he developed that. And it's a guy named Jamie Mustard. He's the author of the book called The Iconist. If you haven't read it or seen it, I highly encourage it. It's great. Jamie's a dear friend of mine. We talk regularly. We're working on some other projects together, but he was a lot like this gal from New York. What was interesting is this gal from New York, she was very mechanical in the sense that, hey, we need to get the packaging right, which is correct. But a lot of it was like, we need to look at, so it was really kind of this, let's look at what everybody else is doing in that space, what's working, and then replicate that. And so, I mean, a lot of that was a good kickstart, but we didn't continue working together. No bad fallout or anything like that. I just was moving quickly. It was supposed to be a 3-month thing. I was done in a month. I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm moving on and just moving full speed ahead. But there was still this, and this is, from the early days, is I'm out in front. My face is out in front, right? Like that was always a hard thing for me that was one of the most difficult things in the beginning of, building website, which I was like, oh man, I don't want to have my face up here. I mean, most of my pictures that I ever take, I'm making a stupid face. It's usually a joke. I don't know how to look serious, right? Those seem really, stupid, but I think most of us deal with that at first. So my website, my thinking around it, I was still out in front. So this to come to that distinction you were talking about in our conversation a couple of days ago. Jamie he has this really unique ability to, the way he defines it, his whole process is identity DNA. He can look and figure out what he told me in our first conversation. This is off the site that I'd built too. He said, oh, I knew this was going to be a good conversation. He goes, but man, after talking to you, your site does nothing to really help me understand like who you are at your core, not about what your message is. He said, oh, your content's great, everything. He said, but it just doesn't look like the person I'm talking to. And so for him, it was, we need to make the outside match the inside. He's like, he said, this website, you guys are way too corporate. He goes, that's not you. And I was like, you're right. It was less corporate than it used to be, but it still wasn't quite there. So I knew for me, my identity of who I am still needed more work. I just had a bunch of other projects going on, like building the Foresight Academy and all this other stuff. I was like, I'll eventually get around to it. So for him to step in and say, look, I can help you with that. And we got working together on a few things. His big thing here is I started to work around that new icon. I did what I did before. I put myself on the front, and he said, no. He said, you have to understand, here's the difference. Most people make this mistake. He said, what's valuable about you is the ideas that you have. You have this powerful view of the future and how to use that in the present. He said, but all of that is stuck behind you in your current state. He said, you need to reverse those roles. You need to stand behind your ideas. That needs to be the first thing somebody sees when they come to your site. That's why when you go to my homepage, my face isn't there. You scroll down, it'll be there, but it's not the first thing you see. It's one of 3 blocks, which is Jamie's whole thing, is creating blocks, things that people remember, these icons that just stick with you and help you stand out in a crowded space. And so, yeah, that, to bring it back to this question of sought after expert to a thought leader, I hadn't really quite thought about the differentiation between the two, because you almost kind of lump those together. And besides, it's like entrepreneur. Everybody on LinkedIn's a thought leader too.
Right, that's true.
It's like, no. So what does it mean to be a thought leader? It's that your ideas, your thoughts, that those are the things that attract people to you, right? And so that really is the direction that this is starting to move in. And it's nothing new. It's not like, oh, I just came up with these yesterday. These have been baked in even from the very beginning with chat. I just didn't know that that's what it was. These core concepts and ideas about, here's the promise that I'm making to you if you work with me. Here is the value that I bring that helps differentiate me from your keynote futurists. All that stuff was there. It was just kind of scattered around, and I didn't know how to quite clearly pull it together. So this has been an evolution the whole time. And now we're at this place, and I've had all those. I know what those core ideas are, but I've just reversed roles where they're out front and I'm standing behind those. So, yeah.
Can I give you a thought, if that's okay?
Of course. Wait, are you a thought leader? Because I only take thoughts from thought leaders.
Yes, I'm an emerging thought leader.
There you go.
The one thing I would add into what your definition is the standing behind your ideas, but putting yourself in the idea. And I think the one thing that would make this stronger, your thought leadership, is your core story around being the musician historian. That I've never heard before. And I don't see that in your website. And I think what's interesting is the connection between the person that you've always been, where you create something out of nothing, and that you feel that that urge to be that creator of your own story, your own future based on your own experience. It's just telling a little bit more and connecting the dots. So if I were going to look at your about page, I would want to see a little bit more of your story and put yourself in the story. And if you were going to tell these big ideas, which I probably would say, I kind of agree with your friend. And then I would just add one other thing, though, is I think a thought leader is about, putting yourself into the content. The expert is I'm hiding behind, like for me, I feel like as an expert, I hid behind all my ideas. And as I've been pushing myself to thought leadership, it's less around what I know and more around my unique perspective on the world, around how important it is for people to own their worth. I mean, the whole reason why I named the podcast Enough Already is I'm trying to put forward my bigger idea, which is around worth and worthiness. And I'm being more willing to tell my story, different aspects of my story. So that would be the only other thing, is I've never heard this in all these years that you and I have been chit-chatting about different aspects of the business. How did we not know that we have such a core fundamental way of approaching the world, in common? So that's just,
I love that. And I would add to that Jamie would agree with you on that too. I mean, I'm probably doing a terrible job of explaining the core philosophy, but you're right. I mean, there is the hiding behind something, which is usually more like, well, I don't want people to know that I'm a solopreneur. Like, that's not the same thing. It's more of, so I think there's 2 parts of that. Is that, and Jamie was really funny too. He goes, man, I don't ever want to see you in a suit jacket again.
That I would agree with. Oh my gosh.
I was like, oh, totally.
Right?
Totally. Yeah.
I remember when I started my first website, I never wanted to be in a suit. And everyone's like, you have to have a suit. Have a suit. No, you don't have to have a suit unless you wear a suit every day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that was something else that was really funny. But all that said is that it was more of the presentation, the packaging of, if somebody comes to your site, don't make them work to, like, you got to have something that immediately catches them. And, so if somebody goes to my site, it's going to be one of those blocks. So where it was before, it was you go to the site and you don't see my face there. The first thing that pops up is this large block that says the future is impractical if you can't leverage it now. And then there's just a button that says, like, learn more. And again, these are things that I'm going to change up. Like, maybe I'll say, here, I'll prove it. And then it'll take you to a very specific place on the site where I prove it, and I talk more about it. But its intent is similar to what my intent was all along, which was, I want you to make a decision real quick or to know really fast if I'm your guy or not. So you go there and some people might be like, well, that sounds stupid, or that sentence doesn't make sense. And they leave. Great. We've all saved each other plenty of time. Others might be like, well, that sounds ridiculous. I want to see how he proves it. Boom. Now we've got what he calls a mystery box in this area of interest. And now we've taken them down the rabbit hole. But
Well,
yeah,
I love that we share the value on continuous improvement as a way of life. It's like, and you might change it because you don't have to.
There's so much more I'm going to do with that. Yeah. But I also want to say, Betsy, what you were talking about my history background, all that, and how you haven't done that. So I will say, good news is that stuff is all coming in.
Yay.
What Jamie's partner, he basically said, look, I'm going to rewrite your bio. It's like, great. So I've sent her all this stuff. So all that stuff will be in there. Yay. That's much more. So what is on there now is what's been on there for a long time. Okay. So I'd say the site is 90% done. So there's a lot of internal changes that I'll be making. So anyway, I'll stop there, but go ahead. Yeah.
So I got 2 wrap-up questions that I'd love to get your feedback on. The first question is, if you were going to go back in time and you were going to talk to that guy who was leaving the insurance business and starting your own business, with what you know now, what advice would you give him?
Ooh, wow. This is a tough question for me because one of I'd say it's a positive thing, but also to my own detriment, is that the way I'm wired is I'm just always moving forward. I'm never looking back. So taking time to reflect back and think, well, what would I do differently? I just, okay. So what advice would I give myself in the very beginning?
Like, if you can time travel and you were going to go meet younger Jared, what would you tell him?
I think 2 things. Number 1 would be, don't forget why you decided to make this change. And the reason for that was that I knew I had a certain skill set. And I wanted to use that to make a more positive impact. And, it sounds really, it's so more positive impact in the world. But that was genuinely what I was thinking. I thought, okay, I'm bored of the insurance industry, but I love, solving problems. And so that was number 1. And then the other thing that I would say is, don't discount your own instinct like you did, because I did. I discounted my own instinct. I didn't trust my gut, like wearing a really nice suit, or I gotta have things look like this. That sucked the life out of me real quick. So I'd say, look, you be you. This is your opportunity. It doesn't matter what anybody else says on this. Take what is good and discard everything else that doesn't fit, and be confident in that. That's what I would go back to.
You be you. That's great. So is there anything else that you want to tell me about your experience in really figuring out your position in the market and the difference that it's made, or anything else about growing a business? And I just didn't ask you the right question.
Oh, no. I would say that, when it comes to positioning, I think the most important thing that you can do is, number 1, be really, really specific on who it is you want to work with. And by specific, I'm not just saying, well, I want to work with CEOs. This net worth. Those things are fine. I'm talking about focusing on character, right? I've got my avatar, for lack of a better word, because it's so unhuman, but down to where, a certain age range, how many kids they have, what their life experience has been like, what their marital status is like. Because I've gone back and I've looked at all the clients that I've had, the ones where we saw the greatest results, I had the most fun, and they looked for other ways to hire me without me having to ask them. They all fit this demographic, men and women. It's a very specific demographic. And so get it clear on that. And then everything you create, imagine that person sitting across the table from you, or across the video, camera from you. And if there's a strange look on their face, like, what? I don't understand that. Change what it is you're saying. You want to make it clear for that person only. Do not try to be all things to all people. Wow. It doesn't work. Make it so people know you're their guy or gal immediately when they come to see you. And that way you'll save yourself and them plenty of time.
This has been super powerful. I cannot thank you enough. And it's been really, really fun to catch up with you. And I wish I would have known that young guy who is writing music and creating things in a history major and not knowing where his place is, if he could see what you've created. And again, your website address is
newfuturist.com, NUFUTURIST.com.
All right. Thank you, Jared.
Thanks, Betsy.